Hi, welcome to the House Nerds. I'm David Lawson.
And I'm Jenny Morris. We're so happy that you're here today because we are going to talk about something really serious. And it's the best part of building, isn't it, David?
Oh, Jenny, it hurts, actually. Um, I think this is one of the most confusing aspects. And I think that my customers think that this is one of the most confusing aspects of building a home. And that is code versus zoning versus deed restrictions and HOA covenants and restrictions. And I know that it's certainly a cause for much frustration during the design process, but these things exist for a reason. Kind of want to talk about the differences, why they exist, and the differences between them.
Yeah, it's a love-hate relationship with this topic
It certainly is.
because we love the product that comes from having these in place, but designing and coordinating and making sure that everything is just so and appropriate to code and not violating anything, it can be cumbersome sometimes, and it can cause you to want to pull your hair out. But the
Yeah.
end result is always worth it.
Yeah. So with code, that's kind of the first layer, and that is really a health and safety issue. And most towns and cities in America have adopted the International Building Code. And that it talks about things like, are your outlets grounded a certain way? Do you have smoke detectors? It even specifies things like, are your house numbers visible from the street so emergency vehicles can find you? And all of those things are really important, not just for your safety living in the house that you build, but eventually probably selling that house or making sure that house is an asset for you.
Yeah, listen, I toured a house this weekend, and let me tell you, it was very interesting. We walked in, and it was one that was going to need a serious remodel, but we walked upstairs into a bedroom, and we noticed a smell right away, and it smelled of gas. And what had happened was there was a gas furnace right next to a water heater in a bedroom closet.
Yeah.
And I mean, that is a huge code violation for a good reason.
Yeah.
So again, I mean, that was okay 30, 40 years ago, but we have since wised up a
Evolved.
little bit.
Right.
So yeah,
And
that's an
that house
instance
was being
where,
sold as is, right? And so the
yes.
buyer needed to know those issues from the inspection report going into that. So the next level of frustration, we'll call it, is zoning. So there's nothing we can do about the International Building Code. Please build your house in a way that is safe for you. Get it inspected. But zoning, city zoning, it often dictates like the size of a house in a particular neighborhood. It determines if it's a single family lot or if it's a multi-tenant lot, things like that. A lot of cities are trying to control, they don't want a 800 square foot house next to a 3,500 square foot house. So oftentimes there's minimums and maximums in the particular zone that you're building. Zoning also affects things like setbacks. So the zoning from the city will affect how close to the property line you can build, and in some cases, what those easements are. So easements are the agreements between the utility company and you, essentially, on the deed that says the utility company can access this, or there is access through your property for all different things. Sometimes people have to cross other property to get to their property. So easements are agreements, but setbacks are really interesting because they're different for every zone. So your designer's got to read the zoning requirements. We recently had an issue in our city where somebody did not get a permit.
Or a
They decided they
designer.
wanted to. That's right. They decided they wanted to build a guest house in their backyard, and they built it 3 feet from the fence, which was 12
No
feet
bueno.
past the setback. And the city made them tear it down after it was mostly constructed. So that's a big, costly mistake. So we've got to make sure that you meet those zoning. And it can be frustrating because cities do have very specific things. And there are some issues or certain times where you can get what's called a variance. And we can probably dig into that a little bit deeper if you want to know what a variance is or if it's even allowed in your city. We can look at those requirements. Sometimes variances are allowed for certain reasons, like there's a geographical issue or there are trees that want to be preserved, and so the city allows you to change setbacks. But oftentimes it's not just on a whim. It's because there's a reason. So we can talk. If you got any more questions about variances, please hit me up. I'll be happy to dig into that and see how it works with your city. So the next level of frustration, as we go up, is our deed restrictions. And deed restrictions are usually done in a development, but they basically say, you can build this kind of house or you can't build this kind of house. Well, one of the common ones I see around here is you can't put a mobile home on this property because, again, those people are trying to protect their home values in that area or in that neighborhood. And that's really up to the whim of the developer or the person selling that property. They can restrict. Can you have outbuildings? Can you have a farming business? It sounds silly, but you might not want to live in an area where people don't have deed restrictions.
Yeah, or I believe that deed restrictions also define whether or not a property can be subdivided and how many times it can be subdivided. So that's something to pay attention to as well.
And that can go with zoning as well because certain cities have minimum lot sizes.
There you go.
So that can go with the deed restrictions and it can go with zoning. So that kind of falls into both. So then the next and highest level of frustration I think that we deal with is HOAs and architectural review committees. And
Everybody take a deep breath.
yes.
Take a deep breath. Woosah. Woosah. We love our HOAs, but we really don't like them. So
ARCs are usually run by volunteers who are trying to enforce the covenants and restrictions of the HOA, but are not designers and not architects. And so I know that you've dealt with this in the past, Jen. And once again, they're there to help preserve home values. HOAs exist so that your neighbor doesn't have a ton of dead cars in their front yard and all that other stuff. But they get down to what materials can be used. I had a meeting today with one where there was only certain types of roof materials that were allowed in the HOA. And so it's really important that you review those things before buying property to know that you can build the house that you actually want to build.
yeah, and just a heads up, your HOA is really the holder of the covenants and bylaws that have been developed by the developer of the land and the
Yeah.
builder who defines what that particular neighborhood is going to look like, what that subdivision needs to look like. So we can't really blame the HOA. It's kind of oftentimes the delivery of the HOA, but really they're the enforcers of the original design and purpose of the land. So even though it could be paint colors or brick types or structure particulars, it protects our home values. We had an issue where somebody built a large patio that was outside HOA regulation and spent a lot of money and ended up having to tear it down. And so it's better for everybody just to know your bylaws, know what you are being held to ahead of time. Have a designer who is willing to surrender to that. It's
And
really
look through all
important.
those, right? And
And look
design a
through all of
house.
them.
Design a house
Absolutely.
that meets those so that you don't have to go back and redesign, or you've designed a house that you've fallen in love with and go, oh, we can't actually build that house here. Now, an HOA and ARC can enforce, certain building materials. Like they could say, hey, it has to be masonry, or it has to be a wood-sided house, or it has to have this type of roof. But interestingly enough, cities, at least here in Texas, can no longer enforce that. So under the zoning regulations that I mentioned before, a lot of cities used to have, it has to be a certain amount of masonry or a certain amount of wood. And Texas passed a law a couple years ago that was actually lobbied for by the vinyl siding industry of all people who wanted to sell their product, and said that the cities can no longer dictate what material gets used. So if you need help negotiating that as well, it's something certainly that I or my team can help with in figuring out how to design your house.
At the same time, it's important to understand where those regulations might have come from.
Right.
I know, like in Texas, there are parts of Texas that get hammered with tornadoes or weather. And, sometimes those regulations are in place to protect you and protect your property. So even though there's now siting options, it might not be the best thing
Right.
in your
And we want to
particular
look at those.
area. You
Right.
want to be mindful of that. And so, again, a great designer is also going to know what's going on in that particular area and kind of help you navigate some of that.
Cool. Yeah. All right. Thank you. If you have any questions, hit us up at housenerds.us.
We'll see you soon. Bye.
Bye.